I'm Monica and welcome to the MCAT Master Interview Series. We're on an ongoing mission to put together the formula for achieving a top MCAT score, and we've been doing this by gathering the most effective MCAT study strategies from verified top scorers, and then we bring them to you in the form of blog articles, daily emails, YouTube videos, strategy courses, through tutoring sessions, and anything else that can help you along this journey to reach your maximum MCAT score. We've been researching and holding interviews with top MCAT scorers for many years now. Until recently we thought, why not let you all in and give you a seat at the table during these interviews? So that's what this series is for. We hope by listening to these interviews you learn proven to work MCAT study strategies you never thought of that you can start implementing right away. And most importantly, we hope you feel an increase in inspiration and motivation because the MCAT journey can be very tough and it can be easy to fall into negative mental cycles. But as you'll learn from these success stories, every top scorer had to deal with the struggles and challenges. And through perseverance, through strategy, through mindset work, they all made it to the top score that was right for them. And with that, we have a real treat for you for our first episode. So today we're speaking with one of our MCAT strategy mentors here at MCAT Mastery, who is also a 100th percentile scorer, Priya Swaminathan. Welcome to the series, Priya, and thanks so much for being here.
Thanks.
Yeah, before we get started, we're just going to give you a little bit of information about Priya's background. So at the start of her prep, Priya was overwhelmed and intimidated by the exam, and after a lot of frustration and stagnant scores, she decided she needed to push her test date back. While this could have been viewed as a huge detriment, Priya took the extra time to focus on the strategies that would bring her success on the exam, and in doing so, she was able to raise her score to a 524 in just 3 months after that. Priya scored in the 100th percentile, which is incredible, and in this interview we're just going to launch into understanding exactly how she did that. We're going to learn more about how Priya studied and increased her score, how she kept herself motivated, how she scheduled her prep, what strategies she used for each section, and so much more. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So Priya, why don't you just start by telling our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I just graduated from college in May, and I started just living my pandemic life post-graduation. So I just day to day, for the whole summer, I was doing med school applications and focusing on that mostly, as well as my MCAT prep. And yeah, now I'm kind of just trying to move on into post-grad life in my gap year. But yeah, I'm starting med school next fall. But yeah, until then, I'm just working a little bit, doing my hobbies. I have a dog, and we go on lots of walks and hikes all the time. I do lots of art and stuff. Normally, I would do some volunteering as well. But just because of the pandemic, I've kind of pared down my activities a little bit.
Yeah, but it sounds like you're still keeping busy despite, everything going on. What are you doing for your gap year?
Really, I kind of just took the time to focus on my MCAT and med school applications. And so now that I'm done with that, I'm not doing a whole lot. I am working with MCAT Mastery as a mentor. So I'm getting to tutor some people, which I've found to be really fun and, a nice casual job. But I'm really just trying to kind of get all my ducks in a row before I go to med school, just, get out my living situation figured out and everything so that I'll feel really prepared, for the experience of medical school.
Yeah, definitely. All of that. And also hopefully it'll prevent burnout as well, because you don't want to just go straight in and, be burned out when you get there. So maybe this can help with that a little bit too.
Yeah, that's really important for me, just feeling ready and relaxed. And so I think having that time between college and med school is really good for me. Personally, I'm sure some people like to just go straight through, but I think I needed a break for sure.
Definitely. Everybody's different. So you just got to do what's best for you. So kind of going back a little bit, what inspired you to want to become a doctor in the first place?
Yeah, I kind of just knew that's kind of what I always wanted to do. I remember when I was a kid, I had a few ideas of maybe some different professions I would want to do, but a doctor was always one of them. And I think just as I've learned more about medicine and done more experience shadowing and volunteering and stuff like that, it just makes sense for me. I can't really imagine doing anything else. My dad is a doctor, so I saw kind of what it would be like growing up. But yeah, I definitely I'm just really passionate about the clinical side of things and being able to interact with people and see patients and just obviously help as much as I can can. And yeah, I think I'm just like, I'm pretty curious in general, and I like knowing like how things work, and it always like is rewarding to me to be able to help someone with like a health problem maybe having, or in just like any way I can. So it's already been really rewarding for me. And so yeah, I don't have like a really concrete like event or anything that caused it. It's kind of always just been what I felt like I was going toward.
Yeah, and that's awesome that you were like sure from, the beginning that you wanted to do it. So I'm sure that helped when things got tough as well. So on that note, I guess let's talk about the MCAT. So where were you in your life when you started prepping, and how did you feel about starting?
Yeah, I think I didn't really know how to handle, like, I didn't have an idea exactly of how big and broad the test was, and I didn't really know how to begin, especially because I wasn't a science major. I had majored in Spanish, so I didn't feel like, I kind of just felt like I had the bare basics, so it was pretty overwhelming to me, and it took me a while just to understand kind of what the test encompassed. So I kind of started like not doing too much. I was just kind of trying to gather information from like my friends of what they did and kind of more about the test. So yeah, I just talked to some of my friends to kind of get an idea of like the scope of how one studies for this test. And yeah, so when I really started trying to study, that was the spring semester of my senior year, so earlier this year. And I was also trying to finish all my pre-med like requisites. So I was taking like physics, orgo, biochem, and a couple other things like all at the same time. And I also was trying to study for the MCAT at the same time. Wow. So that was kind of crazy. And I don't think it was really a good idea, but that's where I started. And obviously, it just wasn't really working because I was just so overwhelmed with like classes and studying for the MCAT. So I was originally going to take my test in March, but then I rescheduled to June. Yeah, and once I was able to like really focus on just the MCAT after I graduated, it became a lot easier to, just focus and actually study efficiently.
Yeah, definitely. And you were graduating too, right? Like that's so much to worry about all at once.
Yeah, and then obviously, plans changed because of the pandemic as well. So I had to move home from college and kind of juggling all of that at the same time. I was really glad I had decided to reschedule at that point because it was kind of just, I had to figure out basic things in my life before I could worry about the MCAT on top of everything else.
Definitely. It was a stressful time, so it was probably good that you kind of took some extra time for that. So did you have a score goal in mind, like when you started, that you wanted to reach?
Yeah, so when I was kind of still studying with during my classes in like the early part of this year, I took my first full length and I had previously taken a diagnostic, but after I had done a little bit of studying, I took a full length and I got a 509, and I was actually pretty happy with that because I didn't feel that prepared at that point and I was really stressed. So seeing that, I got a good score, like a 509 is a good score. So I was happy with that, but I wanted to push it like a little further, because actually I wanted to focus on getting into my state school. And so I was kind of trying to aim for their median, which was, I think, a 514. So I think that was kind of my ballpark where I wanted to be. And I know, I think it's important to remember, it doesn't, at a certain point, it doesn't really matter, if you score, much higher, past a certain point, it's a really good score. So as long as it'll get you to your goal of getting into, the school you want or a school at all, then, that works. So I really just wanted to get a score that would allow me to feel more comfortable with my application.
Yeah, and you surpassed that median, which is awesome. So I'm sure they were impressed by that. So that's great. So in regard to your studying, your preparation for the MCAT, how did you plan your study schedule when you started?
Yeah, so as I said, it was a little bit messy in the beginning and I didn't really know what I was doing. I used some Kaplan resources, and that was kind of like content review, more of that, because it's not really helping you with the actual strategies of the test as much. And so I was kind of felt disorganized, and I was doing a little bit of that content review in the early days. But once I really like got into a groove and did some dedicated studying, I kind of just wanted to get through all that AAMC material and review it as well as I could. So I would just kind of every day, I would study for a few hours a day and like do a little bit in each section, just do practice questions and then review them. And so reviewing that material, it took me a lot of time, but I didn't have like a super strict plan in place. It was more like, I want to get this many hours of studying done today. And I would just, work through the AAMC material. Like I would just go through it and work on each section every day.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Practice is so important. AAMC practice, like that's, top tier. So that makes a lot of sense. So you mentioned that you used AAMC and Kaplan. Were there any other resources that you would recommend or that you found helpful during your
so I kind of just based my studying around the AAMC material. And then when I saw like I needed to improve on a certain area, then I would reference my like Kaplan review books. I would watch videos online, like Khan Academy sometimes. I think Leah for Sci is a really good resource. I signed up for the MCAT Mastery emails, and Leah for Sci, you can sign up for emails from her as well. So she's like a career tutor pretty much for the MCAT and premed. So she gives out some good information that I found helpful. And I just tried to keep it interesting, because I wanted to get the most out of my studying. And I think if you're just bored and like passively reading, it's easy to kind of, get bored with it and not really give it your all. So I used a variety of resources and just whatever resources I needed until like I felt like I understood something. So I would spend a good amount of time like trying to find answers to certain questions that I had that came up for me in my practice. And I think a lot of people use, MCAT forums and stuff online. And I think those can be a good resource as well for, explanations people have come up with for some of that AAMC material. And, just take it with a grain of salt and don't let it stress you out. But if you can use it in a way that's actually helpful for you, I think that's good.
Yeah, I hear a lot about those, like Reddit and other like forums and things like that. And you're right. I'm glad that you kind of brought that up because, they're good, but they can also be damaging too if you're like comparing yourself to like the people on there that got like, 528. So there's definitely, it's two-sided. So that's definitely good to keep in mind. So I kind of have a follow-up question about the resources. So since you focus like your prep around the AAMC stuff, did you ever like run out of that and have to like retake it, or how did you stagger it to kind of make it last, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so this is actually funny because I see a lot of people, they say like, oh, I got through the AAMC material in like 3 or 4 weeks or something. And for me, that was just not an experience at all. I think I generally take my time with things, and it just, for me, it happened to last a really long time. And I think part of the reason for that is that I was reviewing everything so heavily. So I would take a lot of detours off the material to find out like answers for, or just like better explanations or like fill in content gaps and stuff. So it's not like I was going through like a great volume of the AAMC material each day. So I actually spread it out over several months and I never ran out. I actually didn't even finish it all. I finished like the stuff that I think was most high yield for me, but I actually didn't even get through it all, even with working on it for like pretty exclusively for a couple months.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And that's why I asked, because we get a lot of students as well who, have questions about how to stagger those resources. So balancing it with like that review seems like good advice because you run out. So in regard to like your MCAT prep journey, more in a general manner now, I guess, what do you think were your biggest challenges or struggles that you had to overcome?
Yeah, I think just stress really was a big thing for me. And I think I put a lot of pressure on myself, like a lot of us do. So balancing all the things in my life and still trying to do things other than study for the MCAT, it was hard, definitely hard for me. And it took some time for me to get into, a groove where I'd study a couple hours a day or give a number of hours a day, but I would also have other things in my life. And so I was able just to balance things out with time. But yeah, I think the biggest struggle for me was just dealing with the mental part of it and building confidence with it as well.
Yeah. So how do you think, what helped you do that, I guess?
So I didn't want to overwhelm myself. I know some people, they can study for a huge number of hours every day, but I never really could do that. So I just gave myself a more manageable goal. And at the time, once I actually got into my dedicated study time where I didn't have, all these other responsibilities, even then I was only studying 4 to 6 hours a day most of the time. So it wasn't a crazy number of hours that I was doing. So I gave myself, that goal for the day, and I made sure I was studying really efficiently during that time. But then during the other parts of the day, I would do things that would, relieve some stress for me. So I would take my dog for a walk. Really just getting outside was really big for me, and doing what social activities that I could in the midst of the pandemic. So that stuff just helped me balance out everything and put things into perspective a little bit. I think if you're locked in your room for 10 hours a day studying, it's going to be a lot harder to get past the obstacles that come up in your studying, because it'll just feel like it's your whole world. And so the roadblocks are going to feel a little bit harder if you don't have other things to look forward to.
Yeah, that's a great point. Perspective and balance are both so important. And I feel like that's kind of what you're talking about. So yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. So in regard to increasing your score, because obviously you increase your score up to a 524, which is awesome. Do you think overcoming stress played a role in that increase, or what do you think was the most effective strategy or thing that you overcame to increase your score?
Yeah, so I think just really, the stress obviously played a big part in it, because by managing my stress, I was able to keep my studying consistent and positive and effective over time. So I really did feel like those were efficient, good hours of studying when I was studying. And then, so I would keep doing practice exams pretty often and then reviewing them. So it's really, for me, it was the consistent practice with the AAMC material and the review of that material, and kind of seeing where I was stumbling and then trying to fix those errors, and just consistently doing that for a time that I had. That was the biggest thing for me, and just staying consistent and trying, once I learned something, I would try to commit it to memory by doing Anki flashcards. I should have mentioned that earlier. So I made my own Anki flashcards every day when I was studying. If I realized, okay, here's a content gap that came up in this practice question, then I would, reference other materials to figure out the information and learn. And then I would make study guides and flashcards that I could then periodically, review every day. And then, so that was making it so I wouldn't really forget things once I had learned them one time. So then it helped me feel a little bit more efficient about my studying, because by reviewing those facts that I had missed before, I was I kind of committed them to memory and, practiced with them every day. So I found myself kind of making fewer of those mistakes. And so, I think it's good to be able to recognize where you're stumbling and be able to kind of find an approach that works for you to fix those mistakes. And then you can make different mistakes. And I know I made mistakes on my real test. I definitely missed some questions that weren't even that hard, but it was just things that I hadn't encountered before. And honestly, that's okay. And you can still get a really good score, even if you do make mistakes. You don't have to be perfect, but I think it's just keeping that mindset of growth. I'm improving every day. And obviously, once you start to see those small score increases, it helps boost your confidence. And then that helps you perform even better.
Yeah, I was going to say, improving on small things gives you boosting confidence and helps your mindset, which is so important to being successful in the exam. So those are all really awesome tips for students. Okay, so switching gears a tiny bit. So you kind of mentioned mentioned that you were getting the MCAT Mastery emails, and now you're part of the team as a tutor. So what made you want to tutor for the MCAT?
Yeah, so as I said in the beginning, I was really kind of bewildered with how big this test was and how obviously important it is, but also just the breadth of it and how to start. And it took me, a few months to get into that groove where I was making good progress. So I think I just wanted to help other people, like my friends had helped me by giving me, little pieces of advice. Yeah, and I thought it would just be a good thing to help me as well, like stay busy and be productive during the gap year that I had. So yeah, it's been really rewarding whenever someone I'm helping has a score increase or feels like oh, I finally get that now. That's such a good feeling. And yeah, I think it's no one can really tackle this test on their own that well, so helping in any way I can, yeah, that's kind of the goal.
Right. And I say this to tutors a lot, but you guys took the MCAT yourself and you built up this huge array of knowledge and strategies, and what else are you going to do with it other than share it? So it's so awesome that you're taking the time and to do that for students. So this is kind of just a follow-up question on that. So this past summer, you had a lot of students that you worked with, got pretty busy for a second there. So what were some of the most common struggles that you saw in students?
Oh yeah, so I think a lot of people focus on content review for a really long time. And I think that's kind of a difficult thing because obviously you do need some content knowledge for this exam, but I think a lot of times people are approaching it in a way I have to read through all these Kaplan review books before I can even start my practice questions. And so then they spend months trying to kind of go through this material and it's not really sticking for them. And I think you could spend years trying to learn all the content, because that's kind of the point of the undergrad science classes. And so I think taking a step back from that approach that you need to do all of content before you do practice and trying to do a more practice-focused approach is helpful, because then you can just fill in those gaps as they come up, and then you can see, oh, this piece of content comes up quite a bit, so I better make sure I know this. And then you're focusing more on the high yield stuff instead of every little detail that comes up in those review books or in your undergrad classes.
Yeah, that's something that we are huge on is, working on practice and strategies as well as content. Yes, content is important to an extent, but like you said, focusing on content for too long can definitely be a detriment. So yeah, that's awesome that you bring that up. Cool. Well, moving on to your specific scores on the sections of the MCAT. So your high score was on Psych and Soc, where you got a 132, which is amazing. So how did you study for that section specifically?
Yeah, so similarly, as I said before, I focused around the AAMC questions. So when I saw things that came up a bunch, like one of the most common things is Piaget's stages. So once I saw something like that come up, then I would really just try to commit it to memory by making Anki flashcards and sometimes drawing things out to help me kind of remember them better, and just doing consistent review with that. So getting the most that I could out of the AAMC questions. So I would read, when I was reviewing an AAMC question, I would look at all the answer choices, not just the right one or not just the explanation. And I would see okay, so making sure I could understand all the definitions that came up even in the incorrect answer choices, and taking the time to go back to a review book and understanding the content gaps that came up. I found Khan Academy videos pretty helpful for some of the theories, and I think also in terms of the definition part of the Psych Soc section, all the definitions that are important to know, I think relating them to a broader theory can be really helpful. So understanding oh, this term always comes up in the theory of functionalism. It's something that the AAMC always is talking about in this context. And then that way you can kind of have more of an idea of how that definition fits into a bigger picture, or just trying to kind of branch out from them from those terms and saying, okay, they're asking about this term and how is it different from this very similar other term? And then, keeping up that practice every day so that you're constantly being quizzed on those differences. And then as well, in addition to the definitions part of that section, there's the sort of stuff that you need for all the science sections, which is like the graph reading. So just making sure you're reading every part of any figures that come up. I think a lot of times kind of assume that we know what each part of the graph means without reading it fully. And so they like to sometimes focus on the real details in those graphs. So if you can just train yourself to focus more on all the figures they give you and understanding them fully, that'll help as well.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up, both the content piece and practice piece. Obviously, that's kind of what we've been talking about. It's really easy for people to be like, the psych-soc section is just definitions, but, there's also, the graphs and the passages and things like that. So it's important to talk about both. Again. So moving on to your next two highest sections, which were tied, you got a 131 in both cars and biochem. So let's start with cars. As you probably know, a lot of students struggle with this section. How did you study for it, and what advice would you have for a struggling student?
Yeah, so just like everything else, it was really the practice. Luckily, it was actually my strongest section when I started off. So it was something that I kind of felt comfortable with, relatively in the beginning. Just a disclaimer. But I think focusing on really deeply understanding the main idea of the passage is pretty important. I would say never skim. You want to take the time, however long it takes, within reason, but to read through the passage and fully digest it and get the main idea out of there somehow. And I did that mostly by trying to actively read and highlight as I read. I wouldn't write things down because I tried that in the beginning and it actually just took up so much time that I wasn't really able to finish sections like in a timely way. So I definitely tried to highlight strategically. Once you've gotten more familiar with the types of questions they often ask, sometimes you can predict okay, maybe this will be an important detail because it's something they often ask about. So things like when they give a concrete example or a hypothetical situation in a passage, I would take note of that because a lot of times they would ask questions about it later. So yeah, for me, it was just kind of getting down my strategy of how I approached those passages. So I would take in the whole passage first and digest it and try to get out the main idea and if the author had a particular tone or opinion. And then what I would do is read the question stem and try to actually, before I read the answer choices, I would try to make a prediction of what the answer could possibly be based on the question stem and my previous understanding of the passage. And then, if you kind of have an idea of what the answer might look like, then looking at those answer choices and not getting confused by them is going to be a lot easier. And sometimes with that method, you can immediately pick an answer choice once you have a prediction in mind. So for me, it was kind of just getting my strategy down and approaching the passage and the questions in the most efficient but also effective way for me. And I think it'll vary from person to person, but yeah, I think even for me, I consider myself a pretty fast reader, but for me, it was a bit of a timing issue. So I needed to figure out how can I deeply understand the passage enough to be able to accurately answer the questions, but also stay within the time limit. Because, if we had unlimited time, I'd probably take a little bit of a different approach and write things down and things like that. But for me, that just wasn't doable in the time allowed. So yeah.
Right. Sounds like a lot of strategy things and individualized strategies in some cases. So yeah, even just familiarizing yourself with what the questions are going to look like and how to approach the is super important. Awesome. Well, moving on to biochem, how did you study for that section and what advice would you have for students there?
Yeah, so it definitely was a weaker point when I started out because as I said, I didn't major in any science, so I really just had the kind of basics, just prerequisites. So some of the stuff that came up on the test, or in my practice, I just wasn't super familiar with. So I had to review some stuff that I hadn't thought about in a while. And so So for me, just kind of, again, identifying what was important to the AAMC. So seeing the things that came up over and over. Obviously, there's the stuff that's really important, like amino acids, and understanding like everything there is to know about them. And then I think as you go through that material, hopefully you can pick out the stuff that comes up over and over. And sometimes it's kind of weird stuff you wouldn't necessarily expect, but once you see it in that AAMC material, like I would take it as a hint that it's important to them. So then I would make sure I understood the concepts and review content and make flashcards. And also just, I think practicing reading figures methodically is really, really important for this section, just because sometimes they're really complicated figures and it can be a little bit overwhelming. So I just tried to learn how to take those figures apart piece by piece and how to approach it as strategically as possible. And so, getting advice from others and watching videos of people going through passages like online, that was helpful for me. And then trying to apply that to those complicated figures as well. And, also the mindset thing for me, like probably in the beginning, I would have been really overwhelmed by the complicated figures. But as I studied more, then I would be like, okay, so just try to break it down for myself and try to make it simpler for myself and have more of like an approach where I believed in myself and my ability to understand it, as long as I just, took a breath and approached it calmly and as logically as possible. Yeah, so that was the main stuff for me on the biochem.
Right. It does feel like our figures on that section, they can be really complicated. So yeah, definitely working on those, super important, amongst other things. So lastly, we have the Chem and Phys section where you go to 130. So yeah, a lot of students also struggle on this section. So how did you study for Chem and Phys, and was it similar in any way to biochem? I always wonder about that.
Yeah, I would say there definitely are similarities, but yeah, this was the section I was scoring worst on in the beginning, and it was hard for me because I don't know, I didn't like it in the beginning, and I felt like I wasn't gonna do well on it. So obviously then that impacts your performance if you don't feel like confident about it or excited about it. But yeah, I had a similar approach for some of it, since there are some similarities with the biochem, like the figures. There's still sometimes complicated figures that you have to take apart piece by piece. For Chem Phys, the main thing that helped me was realizing that I didn't have to understand the whole passage in order to get the questions right. So I actually started reading the questions first and just trying to find that information in the passage that I needed to answer them, and worrying less about the approach of like understanding the whole passage and like all the techniques they used. And I think that was helpful for me, because I don't think, as like for this section in particular, I don't think you need as comprehensive an understanding of the entire passage in order to get questions correct. So I would really just read the question and then search for the information in the passage that would help me answer the question, and not worry too much about, the whole passage. And then also just practicing doing calculations quickly was helpful for me. So a lot of times you have to use scientific notation and do a bunch of calculations and worry about prefixes and units and all of that stuff. So as I became more comfortable with that, I would start getting more of the answers right once I was able to do those calculations more quickly and accurately. And I think that's a good skill to practice, because a lot of times we don't have to do that exact type of calculation. Like, at least I didn't have to do that too much in college. So just kind of making up practice questions for myself was helpful, as well as just drilling in and using flashcards, stuff that came up, like just like prefixes and units and stuff. I think just understanding those and how like different units relate to each other and things like that helps a lot with the calculation portion.
Yeah, sometimes it's the smallest things like that can be super helpful, and even like pacing on that section. So yeah, that's awesome advice. Cool. Well, that's it for the sections. That was awesome. So moving on to your actual MCAT day, your exam day, how did you feel that morning, and how did the day go itself?
Yeah, so I was trying to keep my mood up and everything. Obviously, I was pretty nervous, but I had taken a practice test like in the week prior, and it had, a better score than I had done before. So I was feeling a little bit more confident with that, under my belt. And so I really just tried to stay confident, like I knew I had spent so much time and effort on this test. I just wanted to give it my best shot. And I was trying not to put too much pressure on myself. So I just wanted to go in there relaxed. So I listened to some music that I like, and I walked around my neighborhood just so I could feel like clear and ready for it. And then, I went to the testing center, and then it was a weird experience. I had gone to the testing center before to like make sure I knew where it was, but that morning the door was locked, and so I ended up calling them, and that was kind of made me a little bit more nervous. But again, I just tried to, stay calm. And I think that was the biggest thing for me, is staying positive throughout the whole thing, even when I had some like parts that didn't seem like they went super well. I remember during the car section, I kind of messed up my timing and I had to rush at the end. And so obviously that's not ideal, and it was a little bit stressful, but I just tried to compartmentalize that and take a breath and try to stay confident for the next section and not let that one obstacle impact my performance on the rest of the test.
Yeah, the day itself is like so much about stress management, like even beforehand, but also like during the exam, like compartmentalizing. So yeah, that's definitely understandable, but you made it out alive. So that's awesome. Yeah. How did it feel walking out and being done?
Oh, it felt good. Oh, the weird thing was my monitor in the testing center, it was actually like all the text was stretched out and it looked weird, which was kind of a weird thing to deal with in the test, but it was okay. I made it out. And then once I was done, I walked out, and when I turned on my phone, all the text on my phone looked weird because I had been looking at the weird text on the screen for so long that I thought my phone had updated or something, because my vision was actually like changed from the test. They definitely could do things to make the testing experience a little nicer, but yeah, I felt so much better when I was walking out, and I kind of had the attitude like, I know it didn't go perfect, but I did it. I'm done. I'm gonna let myself have a break now. I honestly didn't think I didn't think I bombed or anything, but I didn't think I did better than any practice test I had ever done before. I thought I probably would score, maybe in the mid-teens or something. I wasn't that optimistic, so it really shows you that I guess you shouldn't worry like if you didn't feel great about it. I don't think anyone feels awesome about their performance leaving, but yeah.
Yeah, so when you got your score back, what was that? How did that feel?
Oh, I think I was more anxious for the score release than the actual test. I really hated waiting, even though it was only 2 weeks I had to wait. But yeah, I was trying to keep my expectations low so that I wouldn't be disappointed if it was like on the lower end of my scores or something. But yeah, I opened it up and it was way higher than I had any idea was possible. And I was I was in shock. And yeah, I just called my parents, and all my friends were excited for me too, because they knew it like dominated my life for the past few months. So it was really positive moment for me, and it made me feel a lot better about my application as well, because now instead of just being like maybe an average thing on my application, it was actually a really strong point. Yeah, so it was a lot of anxiety building up to the score release, but obviously I was really happy with the result.
Yeah, and you should be. And it's such a testament to like all the work that goes into it and all the stress, and then you come out and you're done and you did well. So not a bad feeling. Be good. And congratulations again on that score. That's awesome. And you're done, which is amazing. So I think those were all the questions that I had, but do you have any final thoughts, I guess, for students who might be listening to this and feeling discouraged and feeling like they can't, be successful on this exam?
Yeah, I would just say be forgiving with yourself. None of us have this like an easy experience with this exam. I think it's difficult for everyone, even those who end up scoring well. So try to stay positive and keep your life balanced, and don't let it take over your life, and have that growth mindset as much as possible, and keep faith in yourself that, you got through undergrad science classes. Those are really difficult, and you can get through this too. It takes a little adjustment and adaptability and perseverance. I know a lot of people have to take this test multiple times, and to me that shows incredible determination, and it's really impressive just deciding to do that. So I think just keeping your mindset, keeping that faith and confidence in yourself is really important as you practice and prepare.
Right. It seems like mindset was like a huge thing for you, and overcoming stress. So hopefully students can listen to this and feel like they can do the same. So yeah, thanks so much again, Priya, for sitting down and taking the time to talk to me and walking me through, I guess, your whole process and all your tips. It was super awesome and fun.
Yeah, it was awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And good luck with everything going forward with your gap year and med school and everything. And to all of our listeners, from Priya and I, we just want to say again, you guys got this. Keep believing in yourself and happy studying. Hey everyone, this is Monica again, and before you go, I just want to remind you that if you're not receiving our daily free MCAT strategy and success story emails yet, definitely be sure to sign up for those at mcatmastery.net/free course. In addition to that, if you feel like you might need personalized help with the exam and would like to have an MCAT mentor kind of look at your situation and help you identify exactly what's holding your score back, you can look into that too at mcatmastery.net/mentors. And lastly, and most importantly, we just want you guys to know that you have what it takes to succeed on this exam. We know the MCAT is intimidating, and when you get a score that's lower than you expected on a practice or on the real thing, it's so easy to feel discouraged or frustrated or even hopeless about the exam. We get it. A lot of us have been there. So we want to give you the guidance that we wish we'd had when we were in your shoes. And that's what these interviews are for. That's what our emails are for. We want you guys to be able to feel confident again, and most importantly, be able to see that med school admission is possible and it's not out of your reach at all. So thanks again for listening, and remember that every top scorer, every med student, and every doctor made it through this journey. So you can do it too. You guys got this.